Okay, so we're about to start. I just shared a link in the chat. This will be your link to follow along with the REPL. And I wonder what happens if you view it incognito. Okay, you're gonna need to make an account. So if you're not sure if you want to make an account, just like you could just like chill and you'll see what happens. If you're looking for polished code, there's a GitHub link that I will share later. So here's what our code looks like, and let's look at the preview. Let me just make sure everyone's on my screen. And if you don't know what test-driven development is, that's fine. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take you from the very beginning. So if you don't code in Python, that's okay as well. The things that we're going to be writing today are going to be simple enough that you can do it in any programming language. So here's our project. How to write code well using tests first. So test-driven development. We're going to explain what this is in a bit, but can anyone here raise their hand if they've heard of this term? Maybe you don't know what it means, but you've heard it somewhere. Okay, a few of us. Keep your hand raised if you know what it means. Okay, so it's just one of these things that people talk about, right? And you're like, what's all the hype about? So let's talk about it right now. In theory, test-driven development is this like ideological, pure idea that you, given a set of requirements, will build tests that enforce those requirements. And then after, you'll write your code. So that sounds very lofty, right? So I'll give you an example. The example we're going to do today is we're going to ask a user, what's your name? And then we need to save that somewhere. So we can break those down to requirements. I need to ask someone what their name is. What's a test that, given that question, someone will answer their name? Okay, that's the first thing. Second thing is I need to save it. So given a record, I need to save it. So if you've never done this before, you're like, what? Where do I even start? And to that, purists will say, well, write your test, design your interface, and so on. It gets a little crazy. Now you're moving away from this like do it your own sort of way, and now you have to start building it with like some sort of pre-designed template. And I find that a little bit distasteful because I don't want anyone to tell me how to write my code. So the way I like to say test-driven development is you're going to use tests to help you write code. Meaning your tests are the most important thing. Your code comes second. Write tests. So here's the textbook definition. Write tests as part of a development process. Strive to improve testability in code. So my opinion is you actually don't need to write your tests first. Rather, your tests should influence how code is written, not the way around. So for me, test-driven development has two primary features. The first one is, imagine you have a function that talks to the internet. It makes a request. So if you build a test, you're gonna have to like mock it, right? And you have to like throw it in. So that's writing your function and then writing your test. But what if your test was more important? So you would put in your function in a way that you actually don't even need to make the request to the internet. You'll say like, here's a thing that talks to something that does dot request. So now that's no longer internet. That's just like this fake thing I built. So now your test came first, so your function looks different. So in my opinion, that's really important because it'll allow you to write more testable code. When your code is more testable, it allows you to write better code. So that's the first thing we're going to explore. In theory, it sounds really complicated. I'm going to show you it looks a little bit easy. The second thing is tests should do the thinking for you. If your tests are written correctly, when you are changing your code, you're not proofreading with your eyes. You're dumb. You just hit run and it tells you what's wrong. You're like, okay, fix this line, change it again, fix this line. So you, by the time you've done what maybe would take someone 3 minutes to do, you're able to do it in 30 seconds by running tests 6-7 times. Just like go June, 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 June. So that's what we're going to do today. I'm going to teach you how to use tests to help you. They're going to be less of a chore, more of a superpower. Does that make sense? I've gone over this part so far. Anyone have any questions so far? Has anyone here written, raise your hand if you've ever written a unit test. Okay, so we have 1.5 hands. So this is going to be fun for you because you're going to see how it's done. I feel like unit tests are like this, like it's like, oh, when you're adult, like you figure out what they tell you when you're in high school, they tell you what condoms are, and it's like it's a secret until you're like in middle school. You're like no one knows what it is, but everyone's heard of it. So it's like it's actually not that impressive. Like it's just this thing that maybe like you just never had. Can I send an invite to Robert? He was able to. You could just take the link that's in Google Calendar, but you know what? I'll just put it in here. Invite, copy link. I'm going to put this in chat. I'm on my work computer, so I don't have my artist who codes Slack here. All right. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to start with a function, and this is a long story. So what I want to do is I basically want to I want to create a function that asks a user for their name, and then they're going to tell us what their name is, and we need to save it somewhere. So we're going to focus on the first half. Okay. So this, if we were not using test-driven development, let's go into main. And okay. Wait, this isn't what main looks like. Give me a second. I need to import it from somewhere else. I have a different REPL. Hey, get out of here. Duplicate. So we're just getting set up right now. Oh, did someone delete it by mistake? No. User input 2. Give me a second. We're going to switch to the right project.
That might have been me, and I'm very sorry, but it's back.
Okay, yeah. So if you're following along, try not to delete anything because you'll see in a bit why. So if anyone here is unfamiliar, we're walking through some very basics in Python code. This here's a docstring. It's human readable. You can ignore it. This is like a way for your code to be found by like automatic documentation generation. So this doesn't matter. It doesn't do anything. Here's our function. I'm creating a function. Has a docstring again. And these 3 dots basically mean figure out later. It's ignored. The program doesn't run anything. Functionally, this has the same effect as pass, except pass is seen as like purposefully passing. 3 dots usually means fill in the blank later. All right. If name equals main means if I run this specific file, do this. So when I import it, don't do this. Only when I run it, do this. Okay. So I'm not really doing anything. So we're going to open up a shell. So this is a script that does nothing. And just to prove that does nothing, we can just like print hello world. All right. To run this, we just run Python main.py. Great. That runs our program. And to show you that the 3 dots have no effect, we do here. Great. It does nothing. So here's our first program. It doesn't do anything. All right. Let's build a test that makes sure this thing runs. So you can do this anywhere you'd like. A good practice is to create a test directory and create a test file that has the name of the file you're trying to write. So our thing is main. So we're going to create test_main. And then we can put in a test. And the test should have, the function should start with the prefix test. So when your test suite is running, it's screening everything that begins with the word test. And what we're basically doing is I'm pulling in my function and I'm running it. Now this is a very bad design, but because my function doesn't do anything, when I run this, it should pass. So here's how you run that. I've already installed PyTest, so I'm just going to run PyTest. And I'm going to run PyTest again with verbose mode. So you'll see here that it found one test. This is the test that ran. And the dots show you how many tests inside this file. 1. And let's just change something to make this break. So if I go into this run program, we can say raise value error. I'm basically just saying you no longer work. Now let's run our test. So now it gave us an error, and it tells us exactly what went wrong. So this is we start reading from the bottom. Okay. So it says, hey, here, I found the test, and this was the error, value error. And it tells me the exact line of code that it happened on line, well, it's founded on whatever, 13. So we don't have, this isn't really giving me the exact syntax for it. Oh yeah, the error was found here on line 13, right? And so in this line 13, we go into the parent, so we can click into here, and this raises an error. So that's a great example of how we'll refund the error messages. So this is like a dummy thing. It doesn't do anything. So if everyone's ready, let's go actually write our function. Sound good?
Hey, Yakov, just to back up a little bit. So if you go back to test main, what is actually happening under the hood when you're assigning run program to result?
Yeah. So actually, I'm not really doing anything. I'm just saying, can you do this? And if it succeeds, if this program, if this test runs, so what I could do is I can do like this, right? I could say assert is not none. but my program doesn't do anything. So this should fail. But because our function doesn't do anything, all I need to make sure is that it ran. But if I was doing something, I need to make sure assert it's equal to Bob or something. So let's get to the real thing. So does that make sense?
Mhm.
So this is like this test actually doesn't do anything at all. This test is actually useless. I just want to show you how to run a test. Does anyone else have any questions? All right, congratulations. You've written your first test. Now let's make our function do something. So we're going to do this the non-test driven development way. We're going to write our function and then we're going to test it. And I'm going to show you why that's not going to work here. Does anyone here code in Python? Anyone here familiar with input? That like built-in function? Rachel, what does input do? Tell our non-Python people what it does.
It gets user input. Or
You're right, except you're missing one detail.
Okay.
From the terminal.
From the term, right? Yeah.
So basically it waits till you talk to it. So we're going to say like this. We'll create a question equals what is your name? And we'll say result equals, or we can even say like user name equals input. And now we can just print it. All right, we shouldn't really using print statements. We should be using logging, but we're going to ignore that. All right, what I've done here is I've just done like a string replacement. If you don't know what this is, I'm just doing like a mail merge equivalent, just fill in the blanks with the function that I put in there. So we're taking this question, we're assigning it to a string, and I'm basically asking the question. Does this make sense? Does lines 7 and 8 make sense? Okay. Lines 10 is pretty basic, right? So what I'm now going to do is I'm going to run this function because I want to show you what it does. Oh, cool. That works a little better. Okay. So first, let's just clear the console so that we don't have anything distracting us. Python main.py. All right, here's the function. So now, because we wrote our function, we're actually not running tests, right? This is not test-driven development. Test-driven development would not be run your function, would be to run your tests. But I'm going to show you first how this works. So if I run here, what is my name? So I'm going to put my name is York. Username is York. Perfect. So that works as we expect, right? So the next thing we need to do is, now that we have the name, we need to save it. So if we were to continue, we would then go save as a JSON and so on. But I'm going to press pause because this isn't to show you how to do it this way. It's to show you how to do it using test-driven development. So what happens when I run my test? Raise a thumbs up if you think the test is going to pass. Thumbs down if you think this test is going to fail. Some undecided people. Who's feels very strongly that it's not going to work? Who's like, this is definitely not working? Okay. Fungi, why is this going to fail?
Well, the test is missing that one step for user input. And so I don't see how it could run the whole thing without that external step.
Let's see. And if you are correct, we should get some sort of like terminal input error. So that's our hypothesis. Let's run it. Okay. You're correct. This is a pretty archaic, like a complex esoteric error. Operating system error. PyTest reading from standard input while reading output is, and it basically, it can't use input. So what if we start doing this workaround? I don't know what this is. So we'll do .s hello. I don't know what this is going to do, but all right. So like we're getting into crazy town, right? So let's go back to our test. Now, if we were doing this using the same approach we've been doing, we now will say, okay, I need a mock input. So I'll pull in map patch. I'll say mock input doesn't ask the user for this. It does this other thing. And we kind of go down that road. Does everyone kind of have a vision for what that looks like and feels like? If no, let's spend a quick second Googling it. Python mock input. So look at the crazy work we need to do. So we need to do a whole bunch of stuff here. Let's see. We can patch this. So let's see if we can patch it. So we'll have to say from unit test or PyTest from PyTest. Will this work? What we're not supposed to do with the string here. What do we have in here? No patch. So I think it's from unit test. From unit test. Whoever's selecting it, can you not select the whole thing? Just so we get like some formatting stuff. There we go. Okay. So we're going down a road that I guess I want to demonstrate that this is not a road you want to go down. All right, it's going to get messy because now we first patch it here. Then we need to patch the input value. So like one thing at a time. So let's see if we get the same errors before. We should get a different error. Okay, so now we're getting more stuff. So we could just say like this. I mean, we're going down a crazy road, right? And this is stuff I kind of want to avoid. Like we're getting into nitty gritty and this starts getting a little wild. Plus, our tests are being written as a byproduct of our function. So how can we avoid this? So you're here to find out. What we're going to do is, first thing is we're going to create a new program, all right? We'll create a program that says def get user input. And we'll say you get a question, which is a string. And we'll say you returns a string. Asks a user a question. And so now we could say return input question. But the truth is, like, this doesn't really help me much. So instead, what I'll say is get username. We'll just change this very slightly. So now I no longer need the question because I always know that my question is going to be, and my question is always going to be this. So we'll change this to look like this. And we'll just return this. Okay, so this is the same thing, right? And we'll say username equals get username. What I'm going to do is I'm going to move this into a new location. I'm going to move this into user input only because it's going to make life a little easier, and you'll see why in a second. And we'll call this get user name. These names don't really matter, so okay. So now we got to import it from main. So let's do that, right? From user input dot, we're going to do user input twice because we're stupid. Or no, it's, what is it called? Get username, import, get username. Oh, great. So what we're going to do now is we're just going to run our Python function. All right, this should work. Great, so that worked. Let's just do that again so you can see. And we'll do this one by one. So our program works exactly as before. So I've basically taken the functionality of getting the username and moved it out. So my run program now is less responsible for anything. Okay. Especially since my program is probably gonna have to do multiple things, right? So this thing just needs to get me a username. So now I can write a test for this function that makes sure that ensures that I get a username. So let's go here and we can create a new file. We can create a new directory if we want. We're just going to create a new file. We're going to call this test get. We'll just get username. Okay. So we need to import it again, right? So let's go into, let's copy our code. Okay, so I need to import it from the right location, right? And now to create a test, I say def test, and I can just put the name of the function. So it gets a prefix. And here we'll say test, or we could just say username. And then assert that the username is not none. So make sure this is an empty string. So this test is going to fail because we know previously that we need to work around the input thing, right? So let's just assert that that's a correct assumption. And if my test fails, both tests, then my assumption is correct and I don't need to change anything. Great, both failed. And let's actually make that not verbose, not verbose. Great, both tests failed. I'm not going to bother checking why because we know why. Let's continue. So does everyone understand where I'm at now? I've taken the function get a username and I've moved it to a new location and I've created a new test for it. So far, so good, right? All right. I'm now going to do everything in this file and then after we're going to break it down. So if you have to explain what this input function does, it takes a question and it returns a string, right? So I'm going to create an interface. I'm going to call this class user interface. Okay. And the truth is, this is an interface that isn't like human. It's like interface for code. So actually we'll call this like base user interface. And this is an abstract class for user input. Now, my class needs to have one method to it, right? So we'll say this will have a class method of def input. And it's going to take a question, right? And then it's going to return a string. I'm going to put 3 dots. So now I can say that there's an interface that always does this thing. You give it an input and it returns something else. Does this make sense here?
What is the self argument doing?
I'm basically saying this is me. Like you can ignore it. It doesn't really, I mean, for a class method is going to always need a pass in itself. Otherwise it won't know how to, it's like, it's a Python. It's an OOP thing. Just pretend it makes sense. So this function is an abstract base, meaning it doesn't do anything. Someone asked a question. It's a Python quirk, exactly. So this is my abstract base, and I'm gonna like give you some like a lot of white space to see the separated stuff. So this is one perfectly fine thing. So now what I need to say is my get username gets a user interface, and it's going to be the type of this base. So now let me create a pure Python version of this. Pure Python interface. And the type of this interface, it's gonna inherit from all of this. Now, since I have an abstract method here, I need to fill it in. So let's create a function for this. Def input self question. You already know how this is going to work. It's going to look exactly the same. And uses built-in method. And I'm just going to do exactly what's here. So check this out. You ready for this magic? Now, whenever I run this program, I'm just going to say the default value is going to be pure Python. Now, instead of using user interface, I just do like this. Done. Does it make sense? It's going to call this guy who has a function called input, which does the same exact thing I was doing before. It's a little bit of magic. Now, to prove that it does the same exact thing, we're going to run our Python program. Whoop. Input is self question. Aha, because it's, so I made a mistake here, which is I need to instantiate the class. Okay, let's try that again. I need to make sure I spell your name right.
You got it. You got it.
So does this make sense, what I just did? Besides for this like crazy stuff up here, does this thing make sense, what I just did? I've removed, does anyone here see where I'm going with this? Anyone can guess what's happening next? By the way, I'm going to make it complicated in a second. It's going to make it neater. So now I can say, wait a second. If I have a pure Python version, I'm going to create a fake Python version. Yo, we're going to cheat. And it inherits just like this other guy. But here, we're going to say, whenever you create yourself, we're going to say self mocked responses equals. Okay, let's take the question here. Now, instead of returning this, I just do this. I say, this is a dictionary. So return the dictionary that I've got from the question. Now, when I run my test, I can just pass this guy in to the get username. Let's do it. Whoa. Okay, so now we're going to say from here, there's another thing to import, which is fake user interface. Now here I'll just say user interface equals this. And if I wanted to go even crazier, I already know this is going to be equal to Robert Howell. So let's run our tests. But we know that our main is going to break. So we're just going to run our PyTest. We can actually specify the test by doing PyTest. We can say tests, and I'll say the exact one, test get username. Okay, now here's the magic of test-driven development. I am not going to think. I'm going to let the code think, the test think for me. So we expected that to work. So let's see. Fake Python interface input is missing a required positional argument. It's missing the question. So let's come back here to get username. Okay, interface input question. Self. When we ran our test, we didn't instantiate it, right? Okay, now let's run it again. Let's make that verbose. Nice. And we'll also say assert username. Magic. We fixed the problem. Does everyone follow what we've done so far? So that's kind of cool. Now let's let's go back to our code and let's start looking at it. So this stuff looks a lot different than we first wrote it, right? But I'm going to show you why this is very pleasant. Until now, I've kind of gone out of the way. I'm like, I have to do all this annoying stuff. I'm going to show you the magic of it. But before I show you the magic, let's refactor this to make it a little bit more neatly. Okay, let's add a file. Let's call this base.py. The truth is we should create a module called interfaces and put them all in there. But for now, you know what? Actually, let's just do that. Let's just do it right. Add a folder, interfaces. All right. Here's another quirk. We have to put an init in here. The init is blank. When we go to our base, we're going to put in our base right here. Okay. I'm gonna do some more magic to hiss in a bit, but before we go there, now we're gonna say, we'll say user input. And we'll put these two, we'll put this one in there. And we also need to import from base, import. And the next thing we're going to do is we just need to import this into here. So we'll just do from interfaces dot base import base user interface, and also from interface. Oh, it's interfaces dot user input import pure Python interface. So let's make sure our tests still work, right? Because we're going to let our test think for us. Okay, great. So we got a module not found, and instead of thinking, I'm just going to read the error exactly. So we're getting the error here on line 3. Line 3 is failing. No module name interfaces. Does it fail on line 2 as well? It fails on line 2 as well. So maybe it needs to find it using a dot notation. Oh, we could say user input dot. Now let's run it again. Annoying. All right, let's run this again. Okay, we got a different one, which is nothing, no module found base. So this is like a REPL quirk that can't find relative path. So we'll just do it the long way. Let's see if this changes it. Great. Do you see how easy that was? How I didn't have to think? That's one thing that test-driven development will give you. It's like, and this is a very simple code. Imagine this thing starts getting bigger and bigger. It's like, I don't need to think. And by the way, we're doing something very basic. We're about to take it to another level in a second. So the thing I want to demonstrate is when you're going wide, test-driven development can really be helpful once it's set up. When you're going deep, I don't really know exactly if it'll help you. But if you're building lots of things that are connected to lots of things, it's hard to keep track in your head. Is that making an impression on you so far? Okay, so let's go a step further. I'm also going to do one more refactor here, which is I'm going to create one more file. I'm going to call this, we'll call this, well, let's create a directory here, interfaces. And it's pretty common to have like a module of just your mocked. So we'll say like mocked user input. And we're going to put this thing here. Let's move this over so we have more space. And what we also need to do is we need to import from the correct location, but we already have that done. Great. And now we need to go back to our test. And we need to run from here no longer. We no longer need to get this. Now we can just do from tests, interfaces, username. Should fill in the blanks for us. It's annoying. Oh, because it needs an init. That's also a Python quirk. Get out of here. Here's my test. Okay. Now let's make sure everything works. It's annoying. REPL it. Come on. Don't take so long. I'm just going to run my test to make sure that everything still works. Done. Easy. So far, so good, right? Okay. So I'm gonna do one more thing that's gonna look like making things much more complicated. I'm basically gonna turn this into an abstract base class. So let me just open that up in the right location. So I'm like gonna copy from other code that I wrote. Where am I? I gave this talk yesterday. Different thing. There we go. So I'm just going to turn this into an abstract class. What this means is I'm going to say, you got to fill this in, otherwise you lose. That's basically what I'm saying. And I'm also going to turn this into a class method. So you remember how I need to instantiate, otherwise it broke? I don't want to do that. That's annoying. So now if I come here, I'm going to keep this as a class method. Now, if I come here, I no longer need instantiate because it's a class method. And if I come into tests, I'm actually not going to make this a class method because I do need to get the attributes from the mocked responses. Unless I put the mocked responses in the root of the file, and then it could be a class method. But because it doesn't really bother me, because when I run this test, I can instantiate if I want. So I'm actually fine. Does that make sense? Now, if I want to go crazy, I can
Just to
create a
backtrack, what does the class method do?
so you see here how I need to instantiate it using parentheses.
Mm.
It's going to make an instance of the class. But if I have a class method, I don't need to instantiate it. So I'll show you what that looks like. You see here how there's no parentheses after it?
Yeah.
Because it doesn't need to access anything. So basically, when you run this, Python has one copy of this class, and it uses the function on it each time. When you instantiate it, Python makes a new version of it and saves it somewhere else.
Mm.
So that's really helpful if like each one's a user and it's like get user password. But if this is like, I don't know, like get user input from the terminal, then you don't really need to instance each time. So our test should work. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
So this test should work the same as before. Oopsies. Let's see what happened. So if we go to abstract method on, this is interfaces baseline 9. So I think the order might need to be reversed. That's a guess. The nice part is I don't really need to think. Just rerun it. Perfect. Look how little work that took. Nice. If you really want to understand all this, you can. I guess the point that I'm trying to demonstrate here is like, you don't need to think as hard. Just like, does the test pass? Then you're done. You don't need to know what, right? I don't care as long as my tests work. Now, because we're testing the real thing, let's also run the main program. Now, our main program is very unimpressive. It does the same thing. Now, let's just press pause here. We've got one test. It does exactly what we expect. How we feel about it. I want to do a quick review of what this test looks like. All right, this test looks a little bit different than the main function, but this is a joy because I can create different fake things to give as input. Imagine it's an API or so on. My code doesn't really care. And let's go look at our original code. Our code actually looks very similar to how it previously did, right? The function looks very simple. But behind the scenes, the function is using something a little bit complicated. And this is the point I want to draw is your function, we're not trying to test if the input command talks to terminal. That's a boundary that we're going to say, I'm not testing that. Python's responsible for that. I'm responsible for taking in a thing that can ask for an input and making sure that you get an answer. And I'm going to create an interface for it. And the interface has to look like this. That's it I care about. So if you have an input, if you have a method that does this, I don't care. So an example is, imagine you have a file that you need to save to into the cloud, like Amazon S3. Do you care if Amazon saved the file? Your test is now going to look like, go save the file. All right. Now look to see if the file is there. Oh, the file is there. Did you check to see if the bytes are corrupted? Did you check to see that they're ordered correctly? Did you check to see that's stored in 3 locations? At some point, you're like, no, that's not my job. So when you test save this to S3, it's a better design to say, test that you told Amazon to save this to S3. Because you don't actually care if they did it or not. That's not your responsibility. Your code now has a very neat abstraction. So now your code breaks. Or no, your user logs in and the website's down. And you're like, what went wrong? You're like, well, pass all the tests. So it means something's going wrong on the Amazon side. You don't even need to ask. Just run your tests. It passes. You're like, done. I'm not even going to look at my code. I know it's not me. It's this other thing. It's this guy. Isn't that nice? So these interfaces create hard abstraction boundaries. Now I'll show you why they're magic. It's because you can create more of these so quickly. So I'm going to create another user interface. And we're just going to create it down here. Okay. We're going to call this rich. Has anyone here used the rich? Uses rich, pretty rich method. Has anyone here heard of the Python package rich? All right. So terminal was asking us this question. Very boring, right? Let's make it fun. So let's add a new package. We're going to go here. If you were using real code, like you wouldn't be doing it this way, but okay. So I'm going to cheat because I already did this. Well, actually, no, we're going to do it in real life. And because we're going to do things not so kosher, I'm just going to like pretend that this is like a new file. Okay. So from rich import console. Is that right? Yeah. Okay, here. Now I'm going to create a console. This is going to do some complicated stuff. So let's just pretend this is all working. So let's say console equals console. Who's asking a question? Testing trafe. Nice, Brian. We're going to create a console here. And now, instead of this, I'm not using the built-in method. I'm going to do console.ask the question, but I'm also going to do style equals magenta. Let's see if this works. If it fails, it'll be because I didn't do something right. Oh, we needed the shell. Shell. So let's see this Python. Oh, but we also need to call the right thing. So because I'm using a shell, if I really care about this, I now need to like build this as an interface. So I'm just going to simplify it and pretend like this is kosher. This is not the right way to do it. Let's just pretend this is the right way to do it. So I'm basically, instead of using the built-in method, I'm using a different method, right? So let's go into our get username. And let's also go into main. Let's import this thing in. Okay. And I'm not going to import that. I'm going to import rich Python interface. And the username will do user interface equals the rich one. Let's see if this works. Python main.py. Okay. That's fine. Let's get back here. It's not ask, is it? Ah, yes. I'm doing some stuff that goes beyond the scope of like what the lesson is, just to really like drive a point. So here we do prompt ask, and then here we say console equals the console we created. But I'll also say here that the style will be equal to magenta. Okay. Now let's run this. Oh, so pretty. And we can do even more stuff here, right? So let's do something crazy. Can we do like blue on white. So what's cool is this now has, so let's take a look here, right? Now I have additional elements. The prompt.ask doesn't bother me anymore, but now there's a console. So if I care about a console, I need to go back to my base user interface, add the concept of a console, and then if there's a console, add it. If not, don't add it. So then I have to start thinking about what makes this function different from this function. And we can start going there and start talking about crazy stuff. Or I could just say like, you know, I need, if I wanted to do it this way, I would need to put the console into the built-in. So if what I would then do is I would say, okay, Python probably uses something similar of like a built-in way to talk to terminal. So I'm either going to represent that with the built-in default, or I'm going to add it as this other thing. And so I can start implementing this. So this is like a complex example. Where this gets even neater is if I want, I could make this a API endpoint. And then the post statement can be the interface. Right? I can just say like make a post statement and then that'll be like this input because the input doesn't have to be the built-in. The input can be get it from a dictionary or get it from a database or get it from a website. So now we've gone past the scope of the original question. The original question was just to do this first thing and we've done it. This is like the bonus round to demonstrate a point. Okay. So now we're going to go back to main. We're going to remove this because we don't need it. We're going to use the default because we don't care about this anymore. And we finished the first part of our program, which is we now have a username. The second thing we need to do is save it. Now, one thing I want to show you here is we're getting the username in a different function. And I've tested that function. Now I can save it using a different function and test the save function independently. So if one of those two break, I know exactly which one, not the run program. In fact, the run program is probably not a good idea to test unless I do the following. Here's how I can make this thing work. If I want this test to work. So actually, let's take a step back, right? And let's have you think it through. Let's hear this from the audience. So let's run PyTest. And we're going to see one test fail and one test succeed, right? So one failed and one passed. The one that failed is the main, and it's because we're getting this OS error. Who here wants to tell me how to fix this? Go through the code. Don't make any changes. Just tell me what I need to do so we can all like see it together. Who here thinks they know where to start? Where are we going to start? Someone brave, raise their hand, take a guess. So our error is happening in which file? It's happening in here on line 9. And that's because get username is using which interface? It's using this interface. So here's what we should do. Let's copy this. Let's put this in main. Let's just say that there is going to be a user interface to the run program. It's going to be the same thing as before. So if we come back here, we'll just import all this. Okay. Now I could just pass the user interface into the function. All right. This should fail the same way. User interface. So here we need to import two things. Let's go back to user input. Right. Okay. So this should fail exactly the same before because I didn't really change anything. I'm using the same thing. But in our test, let's go here. Let's import this. Let's go to test main. Let's just put this here. We might have other parameters. So let's just parameterize it. And we need to instantiate it, right? because this is not, doesn't use class methods. So now I should expect this test to succeed. Nice. And the reason why it succeeded is because we did exactly what we did to the first test to the second test. Does that make sense to everyone?
Can you walk through it one more time, what you did in main?
Yeah.
Like I don't get, after the adding the base user interface and.
So previously, get usernames default was to use the Python thing. So when we ran the test, it was trying to talk to the real Python terminal. So how do I override it? So I can override it by saying, just like here, where I could say, don't talk to Python, because I'm going to tell you specifically what I want, which is I want you to use a fake thing.
Mm.
I need to give myself the option in the test. I want to be able to run this. So I'd basically say, do this. So if I go to run program, I just take it an argument and I just pass it to the child. So if you had multiple questions to ask, then the parent just passes the same thing over and over again. So the test would work the same way. So this is really nice. If I ever ask multiple questions, my tests are ready to go.
Okay, so I'm seeing that in test main, you switched out everything to fake Python interface.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. This is the thing I want to do. And in order for this to work, I need to go into main and add a bunch of stuff. But this is because my tests matter more than anything else. This is the thing I want. So I'm just, and by the way, look how neat this is. This is such a nice, easy test to run. This is nice to look at. This is maybe a little complicated, but I don't care because that's not important. If you want to know what this thing does, go find a test for it. Oh, okay. Got it. Anyway, you have more questions? Anyone have any questions here? So I gave a very humble flex earlier by telling you that we're going to write a 150 line solution and it's going to be better than a 6-line solution. Anyone here feel like that has some legitimacy yet? Or like you're not convinced? Because you're working with easy stuff. By the way, this is advanced. The next step is even more advanced. To save a file locally is crazy. But if you do an interface, it's actually so easy. Shall we do that, or do you want to spend some time asking questions or kind of like playing around? Do you want to go to the next step in this exercise? We got about like 20 minutes left till we can do whatever you like. See, someone's running the program. Run it. Keep going. Oh, it's console. I don't know what console's doing. So how should we spend our next 20 minutes? Do you want to go and run the next step of our program? Or do you want to like, does anyone else other questions that we want to explore? Someone's down for the next step. Give me a thumbs up if you're ready for the next step. So you saw previously what it looks like when we write our function that we write our test. Let's do it the other way around. So let's create here a new folder. No, we're gonna create a new file. We're gonna say test, save to JSON. And we're gonna say test, save record to JSON. So we don't really know what this thing does, right? So now we're gonna go back up here. We already have user inputs. Now let's create a new directory. We'll call this like, I don't know, like DB technically, right? Technically this is our database. And we'll create some boilerplate here. And you already know we're gonna need an interface, but let's write our function first, which is save. Thanks. Okay, we'll just create a function, which is we're gonna import JSON because we're gonna need that. Okay, so now I've got my function. So let's go back into our code and see what we need to do. We need to go here and our function, whoopsies, our function is we have a username. So we probably want to save the username as a key with the value because maybe we want to save other things about it, like what's their favorite food. So we're going to say record equals. So then we have a dictionary, right? And now we're going to save it. So let's import our function from db dot save import. Great, he's able to find it. And now we're going to say like response equals record. So now we figured out that our save record to JSON needs to take in a record. So our record is a dictionary. And we haven't quite figured out what it's going to return. So we'll just say nothing just right now. Great. So we have a record that's coming in and we need to save it to JSON, right? So if I use like, we need to come up with a file name first, right? So let's pretend like let's create a function for that. So def get, so like create file name. And we also need to know like directory, which will make that a string. So let's also create an environment variable here, which is like save dir. And we'll just say here, we'll call this db like data. Okay. Let's also import OS. So now we got even more stuff, right? So let's make an assumption. Assume this always exists, which we can't do. So if we want, we can make a test that does it. Let's just pretend that it always exists. So we can say, well, we can say like this, right? OS make dirs. Yeah, save directory. So here, directory exists. Okay, exist. Okay, equals true. So this is basically going to create a directory without breaking it. Okay, cool. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to list the file and then like we can get the most we're going to pretend that there's we're going to get the number of files and the new file name is n+1. So n files equals, let's get the length. And let's say OS list dir. And then we'll say return. If there's one file, it'll be 1, meaning 0. We'll start at 0. Yeah. I'll just do this .json. And let's also append the directory here. So this is our thing to create a unique file name. We're making a lot of assumptions about how OS works, but it's fine. And we know that, you know, however many files you have, so our assumption here is that we're always going to get a valid file name and that we're always going to have a unique number of file names as a number of files. Okay, our directory names, let's create our file name. So first we'll say file name equals save directory. Now we'll do like with JSON dot dumps, or we can just do like this. Is it JSON dumps? Yeah. let's Google this real quick. Python, JSON. This is already GPT-3, right? File. Should be super easy. There we go. Perfect. Okay. Now we're gonna do some more complicated stuff. With open our file name. Dump our record here. And now this is done. So we'll return the file name. Great. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to come back to our main function. We're going to say here, this is like the file name. And we can just say, print saved user input to this location. Okay. So we've made a bunch of assumptions here and none of it's tested. But fortunately for us, we're thinking about tests real early. So now we can write code that tests this successfully. So the first thing I know is I want to test this guy. No matter what, before I get here, I want to test this. So there's a few things to test here. The first thing is, it's actually maybe harmless to create these directories. Python has a module that lets me create fake directories during tests. But the truth is, I could probably mock this that it will do something real or not. Let's see. Am I okay with this thing existing? Well, I could just say create a temporary location, store all your stuff there during the test, and then remove it. But it doesn't change my concern. Now, the question is, do I really care to test this? Or do I care how many files exist? And just create unique file names for each. So if I were to create a stub for this, I can say def, maybe stubbed, so I could actually make a class to this. I'm realizing we can make a class to this and call this like JSON save. And now I could just make these class methods. And I could just mock this entire thing. I could just stub the entire thing by saying, right, like stubbed. And here we'll just create a init. We'll say self.files equals blank. Now when I create a file name, I'll just say n files equals the number of these guys. And then just return. That's easy. Isn't that nice? The next thing I'll do is when I save it, this one's easy too. Save a record to JSON. Okay, cool. Oh, I still need to have my directory somewhere, right? So we'll actually put the directory in the argument here. Now, I can also pretend that there's files here. So we'll also say files is a list. It's a list of strings. It's also optional. Yeah, let's just go crazy while we're here. So I'm just giving it type hinting so that it knows what to expect. And if you've never done that before, just pretend like it makes sense. Okay. And we'll just say files is equal to this or blank. So if it's none, it'll be, well, we can make default equal to an empty list. Great. So we'll always make it equal to that. Great. So now I know how many files there are. I'll save a record here and I'll create a save directory, but I already have my directory here. So we'll do self.directory. Great. And then I'll just do this. Well, actually, this shouldn't be a list. It should be a dictionary because I'm going to save them. I'll show you. We'll just say it's a list. It's just a dictionary. Yeah, we'll just say it's a dictionary. We don't need the fancy stuff here. And my files here, we could say length of the files dot keys. Okay, because it's gonna be a dictionary. So now when I save it, I just do self dot files file name equals record. Done. This is my mocked. This is my stubbed guy. So now I have the whole thing tested out. And so this is actually probably not the right way to do it, because what I now need to do one step further is I actually need to boil this all off. And well, no, because then I probably want to create like another save function on top of this that takes this as an input and that can like execute whatever this thing is, right? So maybe this like has like dot save and then it calls this. So let's like create a pure Python method here, which is like def save. Yeah, let's do this. Whatever. And it takes a it also takes a record dict. And now here we'll just say, given this guy, we just call this. So now when I test this, I can pass in my stubbed function. So I'm not going to go so far. We can go a little further. We're almost there. Because we need to do one more thing, which is, let's go crazy. We're here anyways, right? So we'll call this like base. And let's go to our inputs. Let's go to our interfaces. Base. Let's pull this guy in. And we'll just call this an abstract method and a class method. I can't remember which one goes first. We'll just figure it out. Yeah, and we'll just fill in the blank. And the same thing here. And let's just verify that that's correct. We do class method and then abstract method. Class method and then abstract. I'm sorry if I'm going fast. We're doing something really advanced. So if you're sticking with me even 50%, then you're doing great. So now we'll inherit from this guy. And this needs the stub version, and this needs this version. Okay. And now we're going to go in here. We'll say that this is always going to be this, and the default will be this. So when we go to test our function, let's go to our test. Test save to JSON. We need to have this one here. Yeah, so we'll say like test record equals user name Sam. Nobody import it from DB save import this guy. Same thing we need to do. Save. Oh yeah. We also need to import some crazy stuff from DB save. What other things do we have? Oh, it's all in there. Okay. We'll just import it again here, which is we have our stub JSON save. And we'll also like instantiate it here. So like stubbed JSON save equals this. And the reason why is because I want to use this more than once. So I can say like do this once or do it twice. Well, actually, we'll just instantiate it once. So here we'll create our class. And we'll pass this thing in, which is, I forgot what we called it. Oh yeah. Call this the JSON saver. So we can do an assertion. We'll say like file name. So let's just assert that the file name is not none. Okay. Hopefully this test works. And then we'll do one more test after this. So let's just do this right quickly. Let's just create a second test, which is test save multiple records to JSON. So we'll say like test records equals a list of records. And the next thing we're going to do is we'll say, you know, saved or like files. And now we'll say, you know, we'll make sure that the no duplicates. So we'll say like length file names, files equals the length of a set of files. That's the first thing we'll do. And we'll also say like nothing is empty. We'll just do this using a terrible thing for like X in here. Assert X is not none. So we're basically creating a bunch of tests here. All right. And we're going kind of overboard, but it's really just to prove a point. And I don't expect these tests to work just because like things are sloppy the first time. So let's just run it. Oops. And we're just going to run this specific test. PyTest. This is tests. Test. Save to JSON. Okay. Oh yeah. Assert that they're equal, not one equal sign. So let's do this again. Let's just run this. Let's let our test think for us. So init files directory string. Aha, so we don't have a default value here, right, for our test. So we're just going to say that our default is directory equals test. Well, so yeah, now we have to make a new assumption. We have to go back and change our assumption, which is when we come here, we don't actually, oh yeah, we do split it. Okay. Let's run it again. Non-default argument follows default argument. So that's in our definition here. So we'll just say like default is like test. So now we can come back here and remove it from our init, right? We no longer needed this. Okay. So now we're in a different error, which is on line 78. Line 78 is the default value. Non-default argument follows a default argument, right? So we always need to have this thing here, which is super annoying. Okay. Let's make this default. Why not? Well, that's kind of cool. We got a new one. Failed. Create file name is not defined. Okay. So what is create file name? Aha. This should be self create file name. And if we come here, self. Thanks for catching that test. One less thing I need to worry about. One test passed. File name is not defined. I love this. So we wrote this test kind of sloppily, right? Okay. So what happened here? We have this length directory JSON and this. What is going on here? Assert 16 is equal to 2. What's going on here? Files. We add them all here. Good. Then we've got this. So let's see. And x equals. Oh, it's the length of the file name. Jeez. Let's run that again. Aha! And now our tests work. But does our main function work? Who thinks our main function is going to work? Who thinks it's like not going to work? If we add this right in there. I'm actually not entirely convinced. But listen, we've got the tests to prove it, right? So our tests are not perfect because they're kind of leaky. We didn't spend a ton of time on it, but we're going to pretend like we've got it. So let's go to user input, get username. We've got DB, right? Save. And we need to import this guy. And all we got to do is pass in our dict. Sounds easy. Just do it. It's already there. We have to say record equals the record. Shall we give it a go? Yeah, the best software has no users, so we don't need to give it a go. Python. And my name is. Okay. So that's I'm curious what broke here. So let's see. JSON save record to JSON is missing one required argument, positional self. So self. JSON saver. So we don't have the right number of arguments. Save record JSON. Record is record. Create file name. Let's just be like super assertive here. Line 18, save record equals this. Save record to JSON. Just this. Oh, they're not class methods. Ugh. That actually is accounted for by our code. So our linter should have raised an error if we ran it. It should be like, you're not an abstract method. And it should be. All right, so we got this far. So what happened here? No such file as directory 0 JSON. Oh, because we hard coded directory probably. Yeah. Yeah. So that's an error, right? So that tells us this probably should be like hard coded. Maybe we should create a new file, a new function that says like just get the number of files. And then we get the number of files, and then this is like uniform. So maybe the parent has this method, which is, let's move that up. The heck did I just do? So we already have this. So we'll just say this. Nice. Check this out, right? So now I could say get n files. And we'll just leave it blank. So now I always know that I need this. So I'll just say like n files is equal to self dot get n files of my directory. And then I'll just return this. So this is done. So now create file name doesn't need to be defined anywhere. But what I now need to do is I need to create I need to say get n files comes from each one of these guys. So in the stub method, I can just say that one's easy, right? This is a class method. And we'll just say, yeah, you just return the length of this thing here. Okay. This might break because it's not supposed to be a class method, but whatever. Actually, that's fine. Okay. Now, the next thing we need to do here is we need to come down here and just define it here. And we can do all that, the same thing here. Perfect. So before we run our program, let's run our tests. What happened here? So it can't, do we have this as a class method? So we'll just override this. We'll just override this in the stub version, and we'll just like copy and paste it. So we'll just say this is not a class method. Great. Our tests worked. Which means we're writing good code. Now let's run the program again. If this works, we're done, by the way. Nah. So what's our problem? With open, we still have our file name as what? Directory 0? Did we not save it? I thought we fixed that. Let's find it. Same stupid mistake. Yeah. We did it. Done. Everyone understand what we just did? It was complicated. I'll give you this much, right? We did something really advanced. But I guess the point I want to show is like, this will get you very far. All right. So we went over by 15 minutes. You asked for it. Who here has any questions about what I just did? It's a lot of code. Let's break it down to what all these things are, just so we have it. And we'll come into this thing. Let's do a quick review. Someone posted a question here. I'm going to rewatch this tomorrow when you're awake. Yeah, let's just do a summary and pay attention to this. All right. I know that when I have something that talks to a computer in a way that I can't mock, I need to create an interface. So I created an interface, and I know that there needs to be something that creates a file name. I know I need something that saves the record to JSON, and I know I need something that gets the number of files in a directory. Right? And I don't really care what those things do. I just know I need them. Then I can create the real thing, right? Go to directory. If it doesn't exist, create it. Count how many files are in it. And then actually go save that file. Pretty straightforward. Where the magic is in this test one, which is when I create you already have files. You're not actually a real file location. When you count it, you just count the files in your list. And when you create the file, just like, don't like do anything fancy. Just do this. Oh, when you save it, just add it. Don't save it locally. That's the real magic. So when I write my code, which is all the way down here, my code doesn't care about any of that stuff. It just calls these things. Now, if I wanted, my function could say get the number of files, get the new location, and I probably could do that. And it would probably enhance my tests, because you saw I got into a lot of issues with each of those one by one, right? I'm probably gonna enhance it. But the most important thing is this thing doesn't really care how it's saved the JSON. All it's testing is, did you ask a thing that's in charge of talking to disk to save it? You're done. It doesn't check to see if the data was saved correctly. It doesn't go in and try to load it and validate the format. It just like doesn't really care. I've drawn a boundary. So if this file fails, I now know that whatever I saved it to, maybe the computer was buffering, maybe it ran out of memory. I know exactly where it broke. So if this was a database, I don't care. Database would look very similar, right? So like save to JSON, I probably need a new interface at that point. I probably can't use this one. I probably need to create like a driver and a database and an insert command, but the save will just call all those things. So I can test other stuff without compromising these tests. These tests never need to change. So that's kind of cool, right? So the function is actually beautiful. This is a really nice function. You got a thing, saves it, record, I'm good. Maybe even uses a directory. Let's look at our tests. The tests will really tell us if we did a good job or not. So I have a bunch of test records. Well, I've got two tests. This first test, all right, let's skip some lines so it looks a little neater. Oh, that's ugly. This test here is pretty neat. Right? I got a record, save it, make sure you save the file. I know exactly what this is doing. If I want to make something fancy, I want to make nesting, I want to make multiple of them, easy. Here I've got a list of records. I could even say test records. We can even make a giant thing, right? We could even say something as huge as this. Let me show you something real cool. You can go crazy here. So I got a bunch of tests, a bunch of files, tons of them. And then I could just, I mean, I'm doing this in a stupid way. This is probably a nicer way to do this, but this is pretty straightforward. So my tests are gorgeous as well. And the last thing is my main function is also stunning. This is so easy to look at. This is exactly how you want your code to look. You don't even care. Just save it. I don't really care how you do it. So that's the big story here. And let's pull in one more thing so we can run our main test because we know that's going to fail. Go to tests. Well, we can actually go to, what is it? DB save. Oh, because we have everything in here. So let's go here. And here we have JSON save. Save record to JSON, JSON saver. So now we need to do another silly thing, which is pass this in. So now we're getting into like even more stupid things that we probably want to avoid. But for now, we're just going to pretend like we like this JSON saver. And we'll probably also need to pull in like base JSON save. Now if we go into our tests main, we've done this before. We know how this works. And everything's saved in the wrong locations. Now here we can just say locked. What's in here? Stubbed. Yeah, we're not using the right names anymore. Let's say no, it's late. And so now if we run all of our tests, we should succeed. Run program, got an error. JSON saver. Aha, we missed an R. Great. You got a bunch of tests, everything works, we're done. And I think it's easy to write code this way. It's certainly easy to work on someone else's code when it looks like this. Setting it up is the hard part. That's usually why you want to work with senior developers. They'll do all this stuff for you. They'll set up the things. They'll make it run in CI. They'll set up all these abstract interfaces. This main thing, this is getting too parameterized. I probably just want to pass in a config that has all the attributes. All this like boilerplate, you shouldn't be doing as someone who's starting to like get introduced to a code base. You should be really focusing on what does it mean to save a record? And then the interfaces, you can maybe use stuff that already exists. So hopefully my takeaways for you are that you take a look and it's like, wow, maybe I can't write that on my own from scratch, but I understood what was happening. And I know how to do one part of that. Saving to JSON is complicated. Mocking a database is complicated. But maybe you can do on your own something that looks like this. All right, we've been going for an hour and a half. Let's do a quick check-in. How's what? I'm gonna stop the recording, and then we'll just like talk amongst each other.